Part 4. Things of the World. An Eastern Sage and the Newspapers. Letter to a Sage. A Western student of the spiritual wrote a fierce and reproving letter to a certain Eastern sage when he saw his name in a newspaper. "You should be completely unconcerned with the things of this world," he said, and much else. When I visited the sage, I asked him what he had thought of the letter, as I wanted to report his reaction to the writer of it. "I do get letters, it is true," he murmured, "but I am afraid I do not read them because, you see, they are things of this world, and I am not concerned with them." Things of this world include, according to the Sufis, anything other than the truth. Conduct of the Sufis. The conduct of the Sufis does not necessarily show their degree of detachment. It more often shows what the observer imagines it to show. Sheikh Yahya Munir, in common with many authorities, states that the behavior of the realized Sufis, the awliya, is not all the same in appearance. Some eat well and sleep, others fast and stay awake at night. Some are clothed in rags, others in excellent clothes. Some accept gifts, others do not. Those who judge others by such appearances are called, by the Sufis, people of externals. Such judgments are made by people whose emotional life has expanded at the expense of their humanity, their logical capacities, and certainly their spiritual perceptions. Taking the name of God. The dilemma of people who only use words and not full understanding for their religious conceptions is well illustrated in this story, the one of the fruit, from Rumi's Fihi ma Fihi. Someone took some fruit from a tree and ate it. The lord of the property said to him, "Why do you do such an unlawful thing? Do you not fear God?" The fruit eater replied, "Why should I? The tree is God's, and I am God's servant, eating from God's tree." The owner said, "Wait, and I will give you your answer." He had the other man tied to the tree and beaten. The man cried out, "Do you not fear God that you do this to me?" The landlord said, "Why should I fear? You are the servant of God, and this stick, which is God's, is being used to strike God's servant." Just as intellectual and systematized religious argument fails when brought into a broader context, so do even wider religious concepts fail when compared with the extra-dimensional perception of truth, which the Sufis bring to human experience. That is the message of all the Sufi sages. Basis for people's interest. Someone wants to know how it is that it is difficult to get to see me. He also wants to publicize my spiritual attainments. I'll tell you about both. It is not either easy or difficult. It is more likely to be a matter of figures, just as it would be with anyone. Taking an 8-hour day and 7-day week, we find that in a year, if one sees one person each hour, in daily session and doing nothing else, giving 1-hour interviews, I could see just under 3,000 people a year, and each one only once. But something between 3 and 10 times that number of people express a desire to see me. And if every year you saw each person only twice, you would only be able to see around 1,500 people. Although the subject is always supposed to be important, I note that the urgency drops off, mysteriously, on holidays and during summer vacations. Mind you, if I were doing nothing else but seeing all comers for an hour a day, the procedure would carry the makings of its own solution. This is because I would become so boring, so worn out, so useless, that people would want to see me less and less, and so I would eventually retrieve my freedom. So rather than have to go through this, why should I not carry on and remain at the position where I am anyway? Especially since there are adequate supplies of other people who are delighted to be surrounded by troops and groups of people imbibing their wisdom from morning to night. I have been criticized for saying this. It is said that such people always create dissatisfaction among the majority of their followers, who soon switch to the next guru. Exactly what I mean. If I were to behave in this way, I would also create dissatisfaction, when people had had enough of my ritual of sitting about being the great guru. I have neither the inclination nor the training to enroll myself in the guru circuit. The foregoing, of course, looks upon the seeing people activity as a socio-psychological activity, already adequately observed by sociologists but entirely ignored by the occult-minded, except when they confuse it with a spiritual activity, which it most certainly is not. In my own experience, amply confirming that of the traditional Sufi authors, this clustering around will have to be justified by the clusterers as a spiritual activity. The onus is on them to do so, or else to seek out their natural affinities, the seekers of adulation whose main other characteristic so often seems to be that they cannot bear to be alone for very long. In my youth, a teacher said to me, "If collecting together were the way to greater enlightenment, grains of sand would all have become saints, flocks of birds would break up and each one would become a spiritual teacher, sheep would exercise the functions of the enlightened." Similarly, the characteristic which we see in the least enlightened to crowd around things and people deemed to be strange, valuable, or exciting would not be gatherings of gapers, but rather assemblies of the elect. Sheikh Abu Ishaq's friends. As to spiritual attainments, I am reminded of the words which Sheikh Abu Ishaq of the Green Island, near Algeciras in Spain, spoke to Ibn Arabi and reported in his 12th century Durat al-Fakira. I regard people as of two types. First, there is the friend who has a good opinion of me and speaks well of me. He is a friend. Then there is the person who speaks badly of me, who tells of my spiritual condition. Thinking in terms of supply and demand. Question. If people interested in spiritual things are asking what are in fact commercial questions, is that the fault of the people or of the systems? How does your range of questioners compare with those received by others working in the spiritual field? Answer. This is several questions in one. First, people have been trained to think in crude supply and demand terms about almost everything. This is due to the culture and social outlook, so it is hard to call it the fault of the people or of the systems which they are approaching with questions. Second, if you read published literature by people working in the spiritual field from the supply and demand analysis point of view, you might be amazed to find that in general, neither the questioner nor the spiritual man seems to be aware that they are engaged upon commercial-type transactions. Third, discussions with professional people, such as doctors and lawyers, show that they get the same kind of questions, structurally supply and demand questions, from their clients, and indeed the whole range of annoyances and subjectivities of which I have been speaking. This is so well understood by real teachers in the East that it is summed up in the joke, "So-and-so went to a certain teacher for conversation, but all he got was illumination." Question. Are your books designed, then, to fill in gaps in possible behavior patterns in people approaching Sufism? Answer. On the general level, they all carry this design, and the result of asking interested people to read them carefully has been to establish and maintain successfully a basis of holding a viewpoint which would otherwise need monastic circumstances to reveal and develop. Question. What other activities do you employ, in addition to your books? Answer. An enormous range. But these activities, many of which, though traditional among Sufis, would be unrecognizable as spiritual by narrowly conditioned people, are experienced following the grounding in of the books, and in specific measure prescribed, as it were, for the needs of the people. Thus they are not susceptible to descriptions like listing them or writing about them. Knowledge as action. People who deal with spiritual matters as if they were commercial questions, people who seek behavior patterns as in the second question, the query about activities, are all, I think, due to enquiries based on the desire for action. To the degree to which this is true, we should note what Sheikh Ibrahim Ghazur-i Elahi says about the matter of knowledge and action, how action cannot take place without knowledge. He stresses that people argue about whether knowledge or action should come first, but they are the same. Worthwhile action is in fact knowledge in operation. Right action stems from right knowledge. Right knowledge is acquired through the teacher. An infuriating book. One of the few instances where we can quote the operation of a non-book as an instrument, yet bridge the area of literature, is in the case of the Book of the Book. This tale, which I published in the form of a book, tells how people become disappointed by books, and how they can learn from them what is and is not in them. Critics were furious because the story was so short, as they assumed that a book must be of a certain length. This fury overtook them before they had read the contents, which described their behavior and showed how inadequate it was. This gave us, and many other people as well, published evidence of the mentality of literary people and literal thinkers which they would never have admitted to if directly challenged. We let them do it for us. This shows how a book can be used to create a situation.